What does it take to up your webcam game?
I'm Mr. Gigabytes, and this is Gigabytes Technology.
Okay, so we're taking a look at 4 cameras today. Web cameras for PC. Now, a lot of people just stream on their laptops and just accept whatever camera for whatever. I'm in a little different situation. I want a decent camera to be able to film with, which means it has to be able to shoot 1080p video at 30 frames per second. This camera is definitely not it. As you can see, this is the little blue camera, and it shoots a maximum of 30 frames per second, although I don't think it's getting that right now. I think we're maybe getting 15 frames per second, and at 640 by 480, which is VGA resolution. The sound you're hearing is the sound off the camera. And the camera itself, the camera sound itself isn't as big of a deal to me, but it may be a bigger deal to you. Let's quickly move on to an HD camera.
So this next camera is an Extreme Studio Pro web camera. Right now I'm capturing 640 by 480 at 25 frames per second, and I'm using YUYV protocol. It's interesting, this is billed as a 720p web camera, but let's go ahead and switch the resolution. Right now, 640 by 480, it's actually looking not too bad right now. But when we switch the resolution, watch what happens. Switch to 1280 by 720, and look how the frame rate drops. 5 frames per second. Woo! Yeah, this sucks. 5 frames per second. Picture looks okay. It's slow and whatnot. Now, let's try something different here. So I'm going to switch this to Motion Jpeg, which is a more modern protocol. You see how the frame rate jumped up 25 frames per second. We'll give it a second here. Black screen. You can leave it sit here all day. It's not capable of doing the a modern protocol. Yeah, you can get it to do it once, and then it doesn't do it anymore. It's really a strange camera. If we go to 1920 by 1080, which is not what it's not supposed to be able to do, again, black screen. It just can't process a Motion JPEG stream. Again, YUYV. Now we see 1280 by 720, 640 by 480. And it can definitely do it, but it's strange that there are no other frames per second other than 25 frames per second. So clearly not really going to cut it for me personally, but really not going to cut it for most people. This is definitely a strange, bizarre camera. Okay, this is a 1080p webcam from Amcrest. And as you can see, the picture and the video is pretty good. Really the only criticism I have about it is this is running, as you can tell over on the side of the screen there. It's running with Motion JPEG. Now, when you're recording with Motion JPEG does not have any audio on it. So I'm not able to capture audio directly off of the camera. In order to get these higher resolutions, the decent frame rates, you have to use separate audio. So I'm using my studio mic to record the audio. And as you can see, it's doing a pretty good job. Let me try. We're going to change it to 640 by 480. Leave it at 30 frames per second. Now, this has got a lot less compression on it, but of course this is a much lower resolution. This is VGA resolution again, but it's capturing at a decent frame rate. Again, capturing at 30 frames per second. Unfortunately, USB only has so much bandwidth, so there are going to be trade-offs with the frame rate and compression and things like that. This particular protocol YUYV is relatively uncompressed. You can't do the higher resolutions with the higher frame rates. 640 by 480 at 30 frames per second is probably about the best you can expect. Although some cameras do claim that they can get 60 frames per second. I don't know about that. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. Do 1280 by 720. As you can see, the frame rate drops down to 10 frames per second with that protocol. 1920 by 1080, 5 frames per second, same with the same protocol. Let's take a look at that, what that looks like. But yeah, it's relatively it's pretty uncompressed. Yeah, but you drop frame rates because you only have so much bandwidth. If we go back to the Motion JPEG, we'll go back up to 30 frames per second. Go ahead and play that. Yep. So, a lot smoother video, but there are trade-offs. This is the Amcrest 4K webcam. This one is interesting as well. If you remember from the previous camera, the previous camera was using compression to overcome some of the limitations with with USB. This one basically does the same thing, but it can do so at a much higher resolution. So let's take a look at a few things. So just for comparison, let's go 640 by 480, 30 frames per second. We're going to do Motion JPEG. And here we go. So there we go. There's the picture from the Amcrest camera. That's not too bad. Kind of a narrower view. So like the previous cameras were, this is in the exact same spot, but when you take a look at it, we're on Motion JPEG again, and now you can see some of the compression lines and things like that. Overall, not a bad picture. Pretty on par for VGA resolution. Let's go to something. Let's try that YUYV. See, and relatively uncompressed. But again, same resolution, VGA. Not as many compression lines. So let's go to an HD resolution. Here we go, 720. Drops down to 10 frames per second, just like before. 1920 by 1080, 5 frames per second, just like the other camera. Now this has still got all of the other resolutions listed. This one does 2 frames per second at 8 megapixels, which is 4K. And if we drop it down one step, 3 frames per second, 5 frames per second, 3 frames per second. So let's take a look at 1920 by 1080. Let's go to Motion JPEG, and let's see what that looks like. To me, it looks about the same. We're getting the same kind of compression lines in the background here. Maybe even a little bit more. Perhaps this stream is even more compressed than the previous stream. So let's go ahead and close this out. Let's try a really high resolution, the maximum resolution. And now, of course, the frame rate drops down to 20 frames per second. Now, this is going to be a square resolution, about a 4:3, for example, aspect ratio. And we see a lot of the same kind of dithering and compression lines in the background. Yeah, we can see that it's not quite 30 frames per second there. I believe they're using a higher compression to achieve a 4K resolution, 8 megapixels. So higher JPEG compression to 2560 by 1440. That should be a widescreen resolution. Yep, that is a widescreen resolution. That one's not too bad. That seems to be, and of course this is about 3 megapixels. But for some reason, let's bring this up full screen once. I can still see compression lines in the background, but for some reason they're not as pronounced. It almost seems like I should be further back to have this in focus. Yeah, all in all, that's not bad. And like I said, at this resolution, the compression lines aren't as pronounced. And of course, this is a widescreen resolution. It's 3 megapixels. So it's not using its full resolution, but it may be using using a good portion of the of the retina of the camera to get a pixel match. So I suppose the next thing we'll do is we're going to actually look at the hardware of the cameras, take a closer look at how these different cameras are built. So let's take a look at the cameras. Well, let's start with this adorable little blue camera. The goofy thing is, I've got a lot of cameras like these they'll do 640 by 480 or less. They'll do about 30 frames per second or less at 640 by 480. I have a ton of cameras like this, and this camera you could get is like the type of camera you could get around the time of Windows Vista. They were cheap. I can usually pick these up for about $5 or $10 on eBay. This one was brand new in a box. I picked up at a garage sale and a bunch of other stuff. They've got this rotary switch that basically just turns the LEDs on and off. They're kind of neat. You know, they're good enough for having a webcam on your face for live streaming, things like that. And I will use something very similar, either this or something very similar to it. This is definitely out because it won't do the HD resolutions that I want. On to the Extreme. Now what's interesting is this one also has the rotary switch, also has the LEDs, does not have any sort of privacy cover on it. This one and the Amcrest, I was not able to capture audio directly off of the camera. So I was not able to get that for you. You know, this is supposed to go over the monitor, and it's got it's got neoprene rubber. It's very lightweight. It likes to, if you're trying to use this as a base, it really likes to tip over pretty easily, and it doesn't really want to stay in one place. I bought this at Menards for a little less than $20. And it's a 720p camera, sure, at 5 frames per second. It was really disappointing. You know, I get it. It's $20. It's built to a cost, and I'm usually very happy with how Extreme Tech products are, but this was just a huge disappointment. This was definitely not worth the $20 that I spent. Because this will do 640 by 480 at 30 frames per second. Okay, maybe I'll use it for that. And it's got the lights and whatnot. But the fact that I couldn't capture audio off of it was disappointing. And I can do 640 by 480 at 30 frames per second with one of these cheaper cameras. Yeah, this one's definitely out. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I am an Amcrest dealer. But I just bought them outright. They didn't provide any sort of reimbursement or didn't provide them for free. I purchased them. This one, which is the 1080 camera, was $40. This one, which is the 4K camera, was $60. So between the two of these were $100 in total. Now there are definitely cheaper 1080p cameras out here. In fact, the Extreme, according to the test utility, claims it can do 1080p, but it can't do it at any decent, frame rate. It can't do it at. It needs to do it with motion JPEG, and it never works right with motion JPEG. That type of thing. These work just fine. If we take a look at the boxes for them, this has got an 8 megapixel image sensor. This has a lot larger image sensor, obviously. CMOS image sensor, 8 megapixel image sensor, 1080p full HD at 30 frames per second, up to 4K Ultra HD 3840 by 2180 or 2160 at 18 frames per second. The test utility said we were getting 20. Linux being a different protocol and whatnot, they're probably playing it safe here. This confirms my suspicion that the 1080 has a 90-degree field of view. The higher resolution camera has a 75-degree field of view, which is perfectly okay for a web camera. Both have built-in microphones. This has approximately an 8-inch USB cable. This has a 5-foot 9-inch USB cable. Speaking of cable length, the Extreme Tech only had a 3-foot cable on it. Very disappointed with that. These have no illumination. These have both got these clip-on privacy covers. I thought that was a neat feature, and definitely more of a modern engineering and forward thinking in these cameras with these privacy covers than the Extreme Tech, which doesn't have any privacy cover whatsoever. So I suppose you could just tape a piece of cardboard or whatever over the top of it. But so out of these two, which did I think was the best? Because obviously I can use either one of them. I'm much happier with the wider field of view on the 1080p camera. I'm not as happy with the lack of choices in resolution, but this, of course, is a 1080p camera. So the 4K camera obviously has better resolution. These both have really nice weighted bases on them, and you can mount them on, they have a little mount here that you could mount them to a tripod. I thought that was really nice, or I can mount it to one of my camera mounts up here. And so so I can use it as a bench camera if I wanted to. Very happy about that. My value for money, the 1080p camera is a much better value for the money. It's as capable at 1080p as the higher end camera. So unless you need the resolution, I would go with the 1080p camera. Spend the $40, you get a really, really nice, decent camera. Real rubber on the base, not just that neoprene stuff. It doesn't really want to fall over that much because it's got a weighted base. Overall, I'm really happy with both of these. I will probably use both of them in various capacities, but yeah, definitely going with the 1080 as my daily driver. So I hope you found this helpful, and as always, thanks for watching. And that looks like absolute poo.